Good morning. So in lieu of another 60-point PowerPoint, because you know I hate PowerPoints, and that one almost put me to sleep, we're doing a little video this morning, and we're going to talk about hand tools. Okay? So, without too much further ado, we're going to run through this entire list real quick. I'll give you a whole bunch of vocab words, basically, and how they're going to function in the shop. Okay? So let's start with the very, very basic thing that everybody should know. A hammer. Specifically, this is a claw hammer. Okay? Now, a claw hammer is primarily used, why it's called a claw, is actually this, is used to take out nails, right? They're not in this board, don't fault me. Used to take out nails or put them in. Pretty straightforward. This is a 16-ounce hammer. They get to be very heavy. You can get up to, I think, 32 is the highest I've seen. Mainly for roofing at that point. To drive nails, better. Okay? So, one thing we don't have out here is there's a type of hammer that looks almost identical, but it has a straight claw that comes out. Any idea why? It's a rip hammer, right? It's meant more for destruction than anything else. This can be a little bit more of a finesse tool. Okay. Sticking with some hammers, we have a ball-peen hammer. Used for a lot of different things, but has the same functions, essentially, as that hammer, without the ripping function. Okay? These guys are great. They don't use as much in the shop. They're normally used for a little bit more finite stuff. This one's older than I am. But, yeah, they're beautiful. Close up on that ball-peen. There we go. Sweet. Staying with hammer-like things. Cool. We have two hammers, or two mallets rather. This one is a rubber mallet. Don't hit screws with the rubber mallet or bolts or anything like that. If you look on the edge of this, you can see how it's really torn up, right? It is ripped apart. And that's because people have hit things they shouldn't with it, right? When we're using rubber mallets, it's normally meant for more finesse stuff, where we don't want to leave a mark. If I were to hit this piece of MDF with that hammer, you'd see a big circle ring. The idea behind this is you can do similar things, but not have to hurt the material. But if you're hitting screws and stuff, you're going to ruin my rubber mallets. Please don't ruin these. They're beautiful tools. Okay. This one is another mallet. Right, as you can tell, this one has also been beat the absolute hell out of. It's torn up. This one is a little special in that it's not quite a rubber mallet. If you hear the Macarena? Can you hear that? It's full, normally of ball bearings, sometimes rubber pellets, just depends what it is. The idea behind it is that you get more weight in your hit. Right? And you can tell the difference between a rubber mallet and a dead blow by that little noise. So if I were to ask you on a test, what's the difference between a rubber mallet and a dead blow hammer, you could probably answer with, it sounds like a Macarena. Okay? And that little motion just gives you more power to your swing. Cool. Okie doke. What is next? Let's talk about, I guess, pliers, since we have the most of these. So when we start at the very beginning, this is your standard, everyday pair of pliers. We don't use these a lot in the shop because we tend to have specialty tools to do everything that we need. But if you're in a pinch, pliers are pretty simple. When we use pliers, and this will go for all of the ones we're about to talk about, basically they're used to take stuff out, get to places you can't reach, and just give you a little extra strength to pull stuff out that you couldn't with your fingers. Okay? Pretty straightforward on that one. Okay. These are called snips. Often called wire snips. They have a lot of other names, their name brand, that we don't really need to talk about. But these can be used to literally snip. You wouldn't do that with a staple because that's sharp. But you can snip them short and hammer them down. Okay? Awesome. Another pair are needle nose pliers. Quite often when we're working with stuff, we have to get into a tight location to do similar things that you would do with pliers. The needle nose help to be able to get in all the way into tight locations and pull stuff up. Okay? Can we guess why they're called needle nose? We have really complicated names for theater. Cool. These are called nips because they nip these out. We also call them staple pullers because of the rounded surface head on these, the hammerhead looking thing. You can grab a staple, not trying to cut it because they will cut it if you put enough power on it, and just rotate across and they pull straight out. Awesome. One more time for posterity. A little better angle. You can grab it and just rotate out. Staple pulls out, no big deal. Works for a lot of stuff. These are Clark's favorite tools. Cool. We have a pair of vice grips, okay? Vice grips are just to give you a little more mechanical advantage in a lot of things. The idea of vice grip is also a name brand tool. Just a heads up, I'm fine with you calling them vice grips. You can grip things with these and tighten it down where you can actually lock the device. This set's broken. One second. I'm not gonna be able to pop that through. Okay, we'll do this in a minute. Anyway, with these, they can lock in and pull forward. So, if you were to get the, I just busted these. Boom. Okay, you could lock in, lock this on, and then you would have a device that could contact around it, right? Meaning that you can make these lock themselves in place, which gives you another free hand. Cool? Vice grips. This is the most missed one on quizzes, and I don't know why. Vice grips. I think that same pair did that last time. Okay. Next plier-like device. These are called tin snips, okay? Tin snips. Can we guess what they're for? They're used to cut through sheet metal most of the time, okay? Thin sheet metal. Do not use them for other devices. They get dull and they're like using a bad knife to cut a steak. We don't like it, okay? Tin snips. Let's go with your standard everyday screwdrivers, okay? There are several different types of screwdrivers, but the ones that we want to really look at are the Phillips head, or the plus screwdriver, as some people have referred to it, or the flathead, and our straight slot, depending on what you want to talk about, okay? Or who you're talking. If you're talking to a 70-year-old, it's a straight slot. But these all come in different sizes and shapes, all with the same. These are the biggest ones I could find so that you could see them on camera. But they come with down to the point where you can like adjust little screws on your glasses, those of you who have that issue. But yeah, see, Phillips, straight slot. Okie doke. Let's jump over. Staplers. The two types of staplers we use in the shop, because we don't staple a lot of paper, are the hammer stapler. This is not a finesse tool, right? If you're doing this, it's for quick work where you can just and run down a line, right? That's how it works. It actually actuates by using it like a hammer, and then it will put staples in. Never gonna be a finesse tool, right? Because I don't care how good you are, you're not gonna go, oh, this 1/8" line, I want to staple right there. It just doesn't work, okay? So this one's used for like hammering down massive drops where you have a 4-inch swath of fabric, just whack. Cool? It's a fun one. We don't often have a use for it all that often. The one we use more often than not is called a T50 stapler, okay? This one gives you a lot more control, and if we're gonna do something, chances are it's with this guy. Comes with different staples. You can set different sizes. They're all labeled for your convenience. Most of the time we don't have to worry about it, but it's pretty simple. Put there, you can actuate each one, right? Gives you a lot more control, and if I wanted to be like, I want to go with the grain, you could go pretty close.
How do you change the...
Thank you, Clark. So, when you add staples to this guy, there's a little release lever, right? You push down to get that little piece of metal out of that hole, boop, and pull out. Once it pulls out, it looks similar to what a normal stapler would look like on the inside. You load staples in, and put this guy back in the same way it came. Cool? No staple gun fights, okay? I was looking at Clark on that one, guys. Cool. So, oh, how do we miss channel locks? So, talk about wrenches here in a minute as well. These are great. Everybody has seen a box end wrench, which I have a lot of and just forgot to bring out. But these guys are great for kind of a catch-all. Both of these tools are. We'll talk about this one next. If you don't have the right tool, this one works out great. It's called a channel lock because it has channels built into it. Once again, we don't have complicated names. It has channels built into it, and you can slide it up and down to get whatever depth you need. In this case, if you were going to try to grab this screw, or this bolt, excuse me, you could set it to how you wanted it, grab it, and make it work, right? This would probably not be the best tool for this, but in a pinch, it'll work. Channel locks. I think these are most popular amongst plumbers, is what you see them used the most often. This is a crescent wrench, mostly used by electricians in theater, but we use them too. That's why it has the rope, so you can tie it to your hip. But same concept. You can tighten this down and make it bigger for whatever size bolt you need to use. And that's really it. These are the most used because if you're going to do a lot of these, especially as an electrician, you can walk around and get the 5 different size bolts you're probably going to use every day versus having 40 of these things hanging on your hip. You can just bring the one. Crescent wrench, often in the industry it's called a C-wrench. Most people like the 10-inch C-wrench. 12s get a little too heavy, and the other ones don't give you enough leverage. You see 8s sometimes as well, but the 10-inch crescent wrench is what we like the most. It's the most used. Okay, since we're talking about bolts, this is called a ratchet, okay? The ratchet has a socket that goes on the end, and the sockets all have a corresponding number. Cool? Those corresponding numbers go with the bolts that we want to use. These do not match, don't make fun of me. So, you put those on there, and you can take them in and out. So, to put these on, you press that down. These are all a little different. You have to play with them a little bit to figure them out sometimes. But you can choose which direction you want to go, forward or reverse, based on just turning this little knobby. Sometimes it'll be a switch, sometimes it's a knobby, okay? So, we put that on there, and you can tighten or loosen the bolt as you see fit, okay? And they help you out. All that does is give you a lot of leverage, and it's a lot quicker than using some of the other wrenches we talked about, okay? Because the wrenches you often have to like reposition. This guy, it's just, okay, go. Awesome. Okay, so let's go back to something you've already covered in class, I believe, with Mr. Clark. This is called a speed square. It has a lot of different usages. I'm not going to go in too far depths because you all should have talked about this at least in some degree. But what it has the option to do, at least for the easy part, these are used often for roofers because you can get crazy angles in all of these things, right? Depending on how you use them, you can actually choose tilt and pitch and be able to make some really cool, accurate cuts using this little angle. But for most of the things we do in class, what we're going to use them for are to mark straight lines and mark 45s, right? You can also use them for offsets on pieces of wood by putting a pencil into this little slot, and you can slide it up and down, and you can figure out what your marking is to be able to get a straight line this way. But that's really the biggest ways we use these. It also has some measuring devices on it if you're not going higher than 6 inches. And they do come up to 12. So I think the biggest I've seen is 12. There we go. This is one of my favorite tools. This is called a combination square or a combo square. Okay? It does a lot of the same stuff that one does as far as being able to get your marks. Comes with a ruler, always nice. It has a few other features that are fun, like a level. Right, we'll go back into levels when we can get a bigger one and it'll be a little easier to see. But the idea behind these are that you can see if things are level that are very tiny, right? If the bubble is in between the circles, it's level. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple on that. We let gravity do it. And this table is, pretty close to perfectly level. In between the bubbles is normally pretty good for what we're doing. In this case, you can tell that it's not quite and perfectly in the center. Awesome. Many of these also come with a scribing tool for metal, but it is the first thing that disappears on every one of these tools. And I don't know where they go. It's like socks in your dryer. Okay, you get a nice pair of socks, one always disappears. Scribing tool leaves almost instantly, every time. Okay. Talking about levels, we got two other types here, because we rarely use the combo square to level things because it's just not big enough, right? We have a normal level, which can give you all kinds of different things. That's the same level as we were talking about with the combo square, okay? As you can tell, the bubble's about the same where it was. And you can do them vertically to get that bubble, or even on 45. And I can tell you, I don't think in my entire life as a carpenter, I have ever used that 45 bubble. I don't think I ever have, but it's there if I need it. As you can tell, they also come with measuring tapes and other fun stuff on them. Not always the best tool, but once again, in a pinch, if you're working on something, there it is. Easy peasy, and you can use it. Okay? One we use very often is called the bullet leveler, or torpedo leveler, depending on who you're talking to. Has all the same bubbles, it's tiny, and it's also has a magnet. So if you're working on metal, it makes life really easy, so that you can check stuff to make sure that things are just where you want them, right?
Why would you use one over another?
Length is the answer. The longer the device or the object you're trying to level is, the longer the tool you want to use, right? If I have a 16-foot thing I'm trying to make sure it's level, and I put this on it, I'm actually only checking that distance. If it's a foot or two, this is probably okay. These come up to like 6 and 8 feet. So if you're dealing with something that spans, what if that thing was straight and then at the end it just kind of tails off? Sometimes you'll need a bigger one just to make sure that you get accurate dimensions. For most of the stuff we do, both of these will work, right? If it's an 8-foot board, this is a little funny to watch somebody go down the line. So yeah, you get longer ones when you need them. Okay. So, now let's do another wrench. Most people refer to this guy as a monkey wrench. It's a pipe wrench. That is its proper name. It does all the things that the adjustable wrenches did on the other one, just for round stock, pipe, things like that you can grab and need to twist. These are always pretty heavy duty just because of what they have to do. You need a lot of leverage to turn the things we're trying to turn. I've used this to turn a 21-foot pipe and it doesn't care. Okay? So this is called a pipe wrench. That's called a technical difficulty.
I'll edit that out.
Okay, folks. So, no one really loves math. There might be 1 or 2 people in the class that really enjoy it. But this is a geometric tool that helps you get around having to measure really, really accurate angles. Okay? This is called a sliding bevel gauge. This one will be on every test, I promise you. Sliding bevel gauge. So what this does is, say I need to cut a really complex angle into something, and I don't want to go up there with a protractor and try to figure it out, right? I can go up to anything that has an angle cut, match said angle cut using this tool. In this case, if this was a 45, you could go through, match whatever angle it is, and then come back in here and scribe that onto a different board, right? So you're like, oh, the angle I need is this. Do I know what angle that is? I could guess, but no, not exactly, right? This gets me an exact cut with almost zero issue without having to go out and measure 40 things, use the Pythagorean theorem or a 1, 2, 3 triangle or anything crazy, right? I can then make something perfect using the sliding bevel gauge. And if you're working on a set that's already built and you're having to do adjustments, this is one of the most handy tools to have, okay? Sliding bevel gauge. Okay. We have a file. Files and rasps look very similar, and we can talk about the differences in a little more detail. But you can tell this one has little grooves, right? This is a fine woodworking tool most of the time. And what they basically use it for is to round off edges, smooth things out, take burrs off metal, depending if it's a metal or a wood rasp. But I don't want to do this too much because I like this piece of wood, but it just very slowly removes material to make sure that you're clean. This is very helpful in instances where you want to round off something that's little, or you need really small amounts of material to remove. File or a rasp. If you're watching one of those old movies, this is what they'd be trying to use to break the bars in a prison, okay? Because no one's gonna hear it. Cool. Let's talk about the most dangerous tool in the shop. This is a box knife, our utility knife, okay? It has a razor blade that retracts into it. Some of them are getting really fancy with guards and stuff today. These are the most common models we have, but it's pretty straightforward. And we can talk about the inner workings of this later. You're not gonna have to change a lot of these razor blades out in class. But this retracts and comes back in. Once again, this is the most dangerous tool in the shop because no one respects it. It's a little blade, you could slice yourself with it just because you're not paying attention or respecting the tool. With all of these things, even though they're hand tools, please respect them. Because the second you don't, you get a little nick. Most of these aren't gonna really hurt you, but they might cause a little issue. I'll tell you, the hand tool that gets me the most is this mean looking thing. It's called a Japanese pool saw, okay? What makes this one interesting is that it can cut both ways. Unlike the next tool we're gonna talk about, the normal hand saw. It cuts both ways and quick. But you can get through something really quick with this guy if you don't have a power tool to do something with. This is really good for finite trimming when you're on set, right? Where you can't maybe get one of the big power tools into where you're trying to work. You're crawling under a platform and you just need that thing nipped off. And it makes the best noise. Anyway, this is one of my favorite tools, and I will tell you, of the hand tools we're talking about, the one that has caused me the most injury, because all of these little teeth can bite really easy. It doesn't take much, okay? So, Japanese pool saw, one of my favorites, mainly because of the noise it makes. When we're talking about carpentry, the tool we don't use a lot anymore because power tools, but is probably most synonymous with it, other than maybe the hammer, is the wood saw, okay? Hand saw, wood saw. This is also a pool saw because it only cuts one way. And that, I'm not gonna try to do that through that same bolt cut. But anyway, everybody's seen one of these workers, seen it in a movie. It's not crazy, but it's a lot slower until you get going with it. One more time, because I can't seem to see that this morning. Cool. Wood saw. Okay. Let's talk about chisels. Okay? Chisels are pretty simple, and we have a few different degrees of chisels that we use in the shop. This is one that I would refer to as a beater chisel at this point. Chisels are supposed to be fine woodworking, right? You put them on something and you remove small amounts of wood. You can see right there, I'm just moving a very tiny amount. And this is a flat surface. You don't normally use these on flat surfaces. but it'll remove just a little bit of material. The problem you have is, like most tools in the shop, people want to use this wrong. Chisels are not meant to pry things open, cut metal, or do anything like that. There are tools for that, but this is a wood chisel and should be used very cleanly to take off very small amounts of material. As you can tell, this one has been destroyed, okay? So if you're going to do something you shouldn't do with a chisel, find a chisel that's destroyed. Come ask Clark or I if there's a better tool for the job. That's always a good call. But people tend to use them wrong, and if we're gonna use a chisel wrong, use one that's already been ruined, okay? Because as a finite woodworking tool, if you look really close into this, see if you can get in here, Clark. You can see this one has been chipped. That's from people hitting screws, staples, or something else. It's been rounded off. And you can sharpen these, but it just never feels the same. This one's been used so bad you can even see the handle is cracked, okay? So, chisels are fine woodworking tools to remove small amounts of material. This is a great tool. Use it correctly. This one you can slip on, make sure you keep good pressure when you're using them, and we will definitely walk you through any of these that we're gonna use in class or that you think you might need a little hands-on experience on, okay? That goes for anything here. But chisels are fun, use the right chisels. Another device that you don't see often, it's a hand planer, okay? If you look in here tight, this one has an adjustable blade. And in this case, I don't know if you can even pick that up, it only hangs out probably less than a 32nd of an inch, okay? Amount we don't often deal with. How these work is if you were doing really fine woodwork and needed to make sure that you got a perfect clean edge, or you were trying to get to a point where the two pieces of wood look like one, you could work this across an item and it would cut just into the flat surface of the wood, and you would slowly work off one of the planes, okay? It's adjustable. You can make that blade go in further or deeper. I'll tell you, if you go in too far with these, you just won't be able to do it. There is a power tool that we don't have in the shop. It's called a joiner or a planer. Both are really awesome tools that do this mechanically. We don't often have a need for those, so we don't carry them in the shop because we don't have the space. But just a good one to know. It's a hand planer. Okay. One you've covered in class, but we'll talk about just very briefly. Tape measures. Tape measures come in various lengths, various sizes. You can get them the little ones, they can hang on your hip. They're tiny. They're great, and I threw it that way. So, these guys come in different lengths. Common lengths are about 16 to 25 feet. I don't ever really use one more than 32. Butterfingers this morning. I don't use one more than 32. A lot of them have locks built into them that can stop things from retracting, so if you needed to keep it out and measure it, you could. Most of them are nice enough to do this. The biggest thing that happens with these that's kind of hilarious is you see people cut into them while using power tools, okay? Which, obviously, if you cut the first 13 inches off, I don't really need this anymore. So don't cut them in half. Try not to kink them too much. And also, when you're using them, make sure your edges are true, right? If this is bent way out of shape, you're gonna get a slightly different measurement, okay? Just something to look for when you're using them. Most of the time you can tell, and if you're within a 16th, you're probably fine. Also, when working a job, any task you're doing, use one tape measure. Don't switch from tape measure to tape measure. Doing that, because of the little bends in this or a slight difference in how they punched it, can give you a slightly different measurement. And once again, it's probably not going to be massive, but it's a good idea to stick with the same tool, just so you don't come back and go, oh, why are all these just a little off? It's a little maddening, so just stick with the same tool. Awesome. Tape measure. Okay, another tool we use quite often is called a chalk line. Okay? Once again, we use complicated names in theater. This is a line that is covered in chalk. The chalk goes into a reservoir in here that we have in the shop. It comes in various colors. The most common are blue and red. And what you would use this for is layout, okay? So let's say we're gonna cut a weird angle on this board. What I would do to do so is we would do a gridding mechanism or whatever we need to do to figure out the angle. We would probably measure back this way and back to this corner. So what we would do is throw the chalk line that way. I'll make Clark be a cameraman and a chalk line holder. And I would move back to the corner. So if this was the piece we needed, I don't really have a way to measure this any other way in the shop, right? We pop it, and you can see that beautiful blue line there, right? It just gives us a quick layout on how or where we need to cut, okay? Just like you learned in lab, if we needed this piece, we would cut over here and run whatever saw, most likely a circ saw in this scenario, along that edge. And then this piece would be good, and we'd be awesome. This is also really good for laying out floors and everything else, and it cuts really straight lines, especially if you get a couple people to make sure, because sometimes you can get lines that are really long with these. Not just on a 2x4, but say across an entire stage. Cool? Chalk lines. Get these out of the way. Cool. This guy is called a crowbar, right? Most people are familiar with a crowbar. It's been popularized in a lot of movies. It has a few functions. We normally use it as a demo tool or a lever in the shop. It can be used to remove screws, similar to a hammer, but most often we use it to pry stuff apart or lift them up so that we can get something underneath a device. Cool? These also come in a lot of different lengths and a lot of different weights. And the same process is used in a lot of different tools. We have a tool called the J-bar that's 6 feet tall, and it's basically just a massive leather arm to do exactly what this is doing, and that's lifting stuff up. Cool. Its littler brother, which is another one of my favorite tools, is called a Wonder Bar. Or as my mentor in undergrad used to yell, Wunderbar! Like he was German. But, used to pry, used to pull screws, used to lift stuff. Same concept as the crowbar, just in a smaller package. This is a great tool. The only reason that I would use a crowbar over this one is if I needed a longer lever arm to be able to lift something. Okay? And that's a big thing to think about. If this is not doable, go to a bigger tool, or a better tool in that case. Awesome. If you've ever built IKEA furniture, you know what this is. These are Allen keys, right? These are two different versions. This is the all-in-one version, which can be used. This one actually has a hex head built in, but they're used the same way that you would build any kind of thing you bought at Walmart. They normally come with their own little T version or L version, but these are the same. These are called Allen keys. The biggest thing to look for with these is if it's metric or standard, because Allen keys are used pretty heavily in the metric system, and we still have a lot of that are going on here. We try to make sure we have both in the shop. Often they're color coded. One is red, one is blue. Depending on brands, you might end up getting a little bit of a different variation. But red and blue are your standards. We try to keep one of each in the shop in case we need them. Cool? Allen keys are used just like guns or anything else. You just put it in and screw it. Awesome. Okay, we got two more measuring tools to talk about. One is called a framing square. These things basically give you really crisp angles unless you make 90-degree lines on a longer surface. Similar to what the speed square does. What we use them most often for is in combination with these stair gauges, okay? And we might talk about these a little more in class. Just know that these are called stair gauges, and they can be placed on a framing square to be able to figure out how much of a rise and run a staircase needs. If you're walking upstairs, the run is what you're stepping on and the rise is what you're stepping up, right? These will let you mark out what you're shooting for to be able to make sure you have the right dimensions there. It's really interesting that stairs come in a lot of different variations that you probably don't recognize when you're walking on them. But stair gauges, framing square. Okay. This is another form of longer square. In the shop, I like to call it a T-square, but it's a little bigger than that. Same concept. If you're marking something that's long, I now have the ability to make a straight line all the way across. And as long as these are handled correctly, their biggest issue is people tend to throw them around. Whew, this one's old. They normally throw them around and they start to come just a little out of square over time, right? Because this has such a massive lever arm, if I were to pull on this, I could pull it out of square even though it has 4 bolts, right? They're normally made out of a flimsy aluminum. I have seen a few out of steel, but just be gentle with them, right? Don't throw them, don't beat them on the ground, use them as a walking stick, and they'll stay straight and true. Because over, in this case, almost 4 feet, if I just move that out of square a little bit, that line's gonna get more and more wonky, and it's just gonna end up messing things up, okay? Be gentle with them. They're really good for straight lines if you need them. Okay. Often we talk about clamping your material down. The reason we care about that is because we don't have 4 arms. It would be great if we did in the shop. I'd like to have one that just like came out of my chest, because it tends to be where I need a flashlight to be held. But if we're drilling things or doing things that are mobile, as you saw earlier when I was trying to saw, this moves around a lot, right? I hate that because it makes our work less accurate, okay? So we have a variation of tools that can actually stop some of those issues, and they're all called clamps, okay? The most popular one that you'll see in every shop is called a C-clamp. Any idea why it's called a C-clamp? We really need to work on more complicated names. But a C-clamp works pretty easy. They do take a little more prep than some of the other ones. And these have been used in carpentry since the dawn of time. But you just tighten it down, and all of a sudden, this piece of wood no longer moves. Right, I can move that whole piece of sheet good before I'm gonna move this. Sometimes you need 2 clamps or whatever else, but often when we're working with stuff, it's nicer to clamp it down because then it won't move on you, okay? And when we're using power tools like the jigsaw and a few of the other things, there's some tricks that you can get around it with the jigsaw. But a lot of the tools that we use, the first step in safety is to clamp it down, okay? One of the biggest offenders, and I know some of you haven't been able to play with it too much, but is the drill press, okay? Also works when you're drilling through steel with a hand drill. It ends up spinning on you, okay? And if this whole board, this wouldn't probably happen with a piece of wood, but if it was a piece of steel, the whole board could spin and whack me. I had it happen once on a job site doing rigging, where I was drilling through something. It was one of those massive power drills. Looks like you could do NASCAR wheels with it. And it just spun and whacked me. And it almost put me on the ground. If I would have been an intelligent human, I could have clamped this down and everything would have been fine, okay? So if something looks like it could move, just clamp it down real quick. As you can tell, these guys can take a little while to get set up, right? To get it clamped down. Because they all come in various lengths. You can get the little ones that are like 2 inches, but they're kind of useless for what we do. Or all the way up to some massive like 12 and 14 inch big ones, okay? Some very intelligent human decided, I'm really tired of spending half my day doing this to clamp down material, okay? And they made what we call quick grips. It has a release up here. Once you pull that, this is cheating. I love it. One of the biggest things about this is these normally don't hold things as secure as a C-clamp, right? There's something about that mechanism that's just a little stronger. But for a lot of the stuff, arguably most of the stuff we do in the shop, you can literally, I'll put it up backwards. Often when you're working, you want to keep the longest thing down because if you do this, which we're going to do in class right now so you can see how it works, put it down, give it a few squeezes, and we're locked in. Right? Cool. Why do we not want to have this up in the air if we can help it? Sometimes we have to. Because normally, if we're cutting out here, we're focused out here, okay? So when we go to cut, I have hit myself in the forehead with this before. I'm just saying, you're probably smarter than I am, but be careful with that. It's easier to put it down. Also, it gives you more room with your tool, right? You can move stuff around a lot cleaner if it's like this. Awesome? Great. Few other variants. Gator clamp. They're called a lot of things. We only really use these for curtains, but occasionally when you're working on small stuff, they're nice to have around, right? They can secure something. They're not crazy strong. They're kind of like a wrist exercise or a hand exercise. But you always want to put these on curtains and things like that. They're not nearly as strong as those. So if you're clamping wood together, this is probably not your first choice. This works in a very similar fashion to the vice grip, right? And if you really want something down that's smaller, sheet steel, stuff like that, you can set the width, lock it in, and it works really well. Let's see if I can get it on this piece of wood. This also works with the vice grip, so you get an idea. If you listen, can you come around here quick? Sorry. Come around here, you can lock it in, and as you can tell, it's really nice, okay? And that's completely hands-free and really quick for smaller things. It'll keep things down and secure. Cool. Okay, folks, that about sums up the hand tools oh, I forgot this guy. I lied to you. This is called a bar clamp. So remember I said earlier that normally in a shop, the biggest C-clamp you're gonna see is about 14 inches. These guys get a lot longer, but occasionally you want something to really grab, right? So we have what's called a bar clamp. Works on the same principle as the C-clamp, still has that wonderful screw lever. And you can get these 8 feet long. So you can clamp massive things together, okay? But the same principle, it's kind of like those two combined. You can slide your stop up and down. Imagine this was empty. You'd put that there, and whatever you needed to clamp together, you'd put on the other side and just clamp it down. Because as you can tell, this doesn't have a lot of screw thread, okay? So you don't get the option to like just crank down forever, and that's why it has the adjustable side. Cool? Well, folks, that about concludes hand tools that we use in the shop. There'll be a few more specialty ones pop up. Once again, if you have any questions about any of these while we're using them, talk to us, okay? We'll be glad to give you a hands-on demonstration. We'll be doing some of that in the shop, and as we need them, we'll definitely be pulling them out and playing with them. But don't be afraid to ask. There's a lot of them. There's a whole room full of tools in there that we can always talk through. Thank you. Have a good day.